Assalamu alaikum and good day. This is Ma'am Siti Aina Pandapatan. For this session, we're going to discuss about the historical and biographical criticism. But before that, I would like to have a very quick summary of what was given to you for the week one material. In that material, we stated that literary criticism refers to a set of principles evolved for the evaluation of works of literature. We also stated there that there is no single approach to the criticism of literature, and the literary critic approaches a work according to established codes, doctrines, or aesthetic principles. He is a mediator between the work and the reading public. That reading public includes the reader. Okay, he can arouse enthusiasm in the reader and can as well kill that enthusiasm. And literary criticism also deals with analyzing, classifying, expounding, and evaluating a work of art in order to form one's opinion. It could be summed up that the rule of modern literary criticism is the answers you get from a text depend entirely upon the kind of questions you put to it. This implies that the same text legitimately means different things to different people. As a result, for example, um, may iba kang you have different perspective. You as a reader, yung kaibigan mo, as a reader also, has different perspective. So we give different meaning to the text depending on our perspective. Okay, so that's literary criticism. Now, for this session, we're going to discuss the historical and biographical criticism, but let's start first with the historical criticism. Um, in historical criticism, during the 19th century, the growing faith in science influenced both literature and the interpretation of literature. Okay? Again, yung science or the science influenced the literature and the way we interpret the literature. With this, it makes the historical criticism popular approach in criticizing a literature or a piece of literature. Okay, so these are just some of the concepts of the historical criticism. Um, there are two French philosophers who influenced the historical criticism. They are Auguste Comte and Hippolyte Taine. Okay, in historical criticism, it emphasizes the social and cultural environment that surrounds a work of art. That work of art is the literature. Okay, so it has also several goals, including the study of a particular culture and the evolution of literary tradition. So, historical criticism obviously um, focuses on the history, specifically the social and the cultural environment. Now, historical theory requires that you apply to a literary text specific historical information about the time during which an author wrote. So, it is very important to take note kailan ba naisulat yung isang literature, isang piece of literature. So, with that, you can trace what kind of society yung it portrays, what are the way of living of the people that time. So with that, you can understand a particular text. Okay, so accordingly, in historical criticism also, it believes that historical critics could illuminate works of literature by studying what gave birth to them, meaning the intellectual and cultural environment from which they came, their sources and antecedents, authors' lives, authors' intentions, and authors' language. So you can understand the text if you would know the cultural environment, as I've said a while ago, the author's life, ano yung um, way of living that time. And then the author's intention and the author's language. Okay. Okay. It is also believed that this approach was scientific because they were dealing with objective reality. That objective reality is the historically verifiable facts. Okay? So, the historical periods and intellectual movements to which works belonged are also considered in the historical criticism. Okay, to this end, critics studied the conventions and ideas that characterized movements such as the use of blank verse. Okay, are you familiar with blank verse? Okay, that's in poetry. When that blank verse was popularized during the Renaissance period. And at the same time, yung free will, the emphasis of free will was also popularized during the Romantic period. So with this, we can say that we can trace the history through the intellectual movement. Okay, so next one is the fundamental tenets of historical criticisms. Okay, um, historical criticism seeks to recognize the influence of environment on literature. Diba? Yan yung paulit-ulit natin sinasabi kanina. So among the steps to take when considering the historical context and literary criticism are, number one, determine the historical period of the work. Yung sinabi ko kanina na kailan ba siya na-publish, yung libro na yon or yung text na yon, so that you would know. Okay? Number two is consider major events, values, beliefs, etc. of the epoch. In that way, you would know also the meaning of the text. Another one is consider how the work fits with or stands apart from mainstream values or beliefs of the time. Ano ba yung mga beliefs nila and values? Okay? Number four, consider other texts of the time that might give the reader insight into the time period. Okay. Douglas Bush, 1965, surmises that since the great mass of great literature belongs to the past, right? Lahat ng mga literature belongs to the past. Okay. Adequate criticism must grow out of historical knowledge, cultural and linguistic, as well as out of intuitive insight. It means that every work must be understood on its own terms as the product of a particular mind in a particular setting, and that mind and setting must be recreated through all the resources that learning and historical imagination can muster, not excluding the author's intention if that is known. The very pastness of a work is part of its meaning for us and must be realized to the best of our power. If we do not pay attention to authors and their historical context, according to Bush, we run the risk of anachronistic misreadings and misunderstandings. Again, if hindi natin i-consider yung historical context, is that we may misunderstand a text. We may be limited in our ability to recreate the outward and inward conditions in which a work of art was engendered. But unless we try, if we try natin siyang hanapin yung historical context, we cannot distinguish between its local and temporal and its universal and timeless elements. Indeed, we may not be able to understand some works at all. Again, historical context. Knowing the historical context is very helpful in understanding a text, specifically if that text is ancient na. Okay, so that's the purpose of historical criticism. Okay, there another one is the biographical criticism. You can understand the text through the biographical criticism. Ano ba yung biographical criticism? Okay, in biographical criticism, it is a theoretical approach to literature that manifests some interest in the author. Now, yung historical criticism, concern niya is the historical context. Now, the concern of biographical criticism is the author. You can understand the text again by considering the author. Literature is written by actual people, and that understanding an author's life can help readers comprehend the work more thoroughly. It is very important na you dig deep more muna sa ano ba yung buhay ng author, so that you can understand a particular text, because maybe an author can the perspective of the author, kung ano yung naging buhay niya, may contribute to the meaning of the text. Sometimes, mere knowing a single important fact about an author's life could illuminate our reading of a poem or a story. Now, let's define biographical criticism. Okay, it is the practice of analyzing a piece of literary work through the lens of the author's experience. So, ano ba yung author's experience? In reading a text, hindi sinasabi ng author yung experience na, ito yung experience ko, so ito yung meaning ng text. No. It is you who will identify ano yung experience ng author by studying first his or her life. Studying first or reading first the ways, his age, race, gender, family, education, and economic status, because it can inform us. It can inform us and give us meaning, okay? Meaning to the literary work. In biographical criticism, it examines how a literary work reflects personality characteristics, life experiences, and psychological dynamics of the author. Okay, so in biographical criticism, si Samuel Johnson, yung reputed to be the first great biographical critic. Again, si Samuel Johnson. Okay. In biographical criticism, it seeks to answer this question: how does the text reflect the author's life? Okay, is this text an extension of the author's position on issues in the author's life? Okay, maybe. Kasi the author can really influence the text. Since siya yung nagsusulat, then maybe his experience pwede niyang maisulat doon. Okay? So, here are the fundamental tenets of biographical criticism. First one is, biographical criticism is not an attempt to draw parallels between the author's life and his fiction. Rather, it is a study of the author's intention and audience. Again, it means that kung ano yung literary work na yun, it doesn't mean na yun din yung buhay ng author. Okay? So, it is just a study of the author's intention and the audience. Yung audience na yan is the reader. Again, the next one is biographical criticism seeks to illuminate the deeper meaning of themes, conflicts, characters, settings, and literary allusions based on the author's own concerns and conflicts. Another one is understanding the writer's life and influences helps the reader discover the author's intended meaning. Again, nandito naman si writer's life and influences, which can help us discover the meaning of the text. Okay, now, for a thorough biographical criticism, the reader should, okay, ano ba yung dapat gawin ng reader? First, research the author's life. Okay. Number two, use the biographical information to understand the inferential and evaluative levels of the work. Research the author's beliefs, not just the life, but also his beliefs. Relate those systems of belief to the work. Meaning ng work na yan is yung literary work. Next, explain how the connections reflect in the work's themes and topics. And then, explain what can be determined about the author's statements within the text based on the biographical information. Okay? So, in that way, you would know, or we can understand the intended meaning of the text. Now, here are the questions to be asked. Kanina, na-present natin yung dalawa, specify natin ngayon. Okay? So, the following questions should be asked when doing a biographical criticism. Okay, here. Are facts about the writer's life relevant to my understanding of the work or literary work? Okay, next. Are characters and incidents in the work versions of the writer's own experiences? Next one is, are the writer's values reflected in the work? Nagre-reflect ba yung values ng writer sa literary work na yun? Next, how do the connections explain the author's purpose and the overall meaning of the work? Okay, through this question, you can now make or do a biographical criticism. Okay, so for the summary of the biographical criticism, biographical criticism postulates that all literary works are situated in specific biographical contexts from which they are generated. The biographical approach allows us to better understand the elements within a literary work as well as to relate works to the intention of the author and the audience. Again, we can understand the literary text or literary work if we know the author's experiences. And for the historical criticism, the historical context of the text will let us understand the meaning of the literary work. Okay, through historical criticism, it can help us to better understand how the time and the place in which the creation of a literary work affects its meaning and interpretation. And a major emphasis of this criticism is that historical periods and intellectual movements to which literary works belonged will help us understand the literary work. Okay, so I hope you understand our lesson for this session, and I'm looking forward that you can answer the questions that I will be giving to you after this session. Okay, thank you for listening.